Hi, my name is Matt. This is our client Ben. We're going to be demonstrating 3 lower body strengthening exercises per our exercise program that we prescribed last week. First thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting off with a demonstration of his first movement, which is going to be the goblet squat. So I'm going to demonstrate what the form is going to look like. First off, we're going to start with our feet about a little bit outside hip width. You can do hip width if you like, and whatever foot position is comfortable for you. Some people prefer feet pointing straight forward, but some people's hip anatomy is different, and it will allow for them to be comfortable with their hips or with their feet pointed out a little bit. Personally, I point my feet out a little bit when I do squats. That's just how my hips work, but whatever is appropriate for you. The next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be holding some sort of external resistance in front of us like this, with the elbows tucked in, so that when we get down to the bottom of the squat, the elbows are going to be inside the hips. So I'll demonstrate what that looks like right now. So we're going to be holding the external resistance, and then we're going to be getting down to the bottom position with the elbows inside the hips, and then we're going to be going back up. And so one thing to pay attention to when going down with the movement is that we're sitting the hips backwards, and I'll demonstrate that with a side view. We want to make sure that the hips are going backwards along with the body traveling down. We don't want the knees shooting too far forward. We don't want the heels coming off the ground. We want to make sure that we keep the whole foot on the ground, that we sit the hips back and bend the knees at the same time. And on the way up, we're driving through the heels and propelling our body forward. Another thing about the squat or any type of squatting movement is that we want to make sure that after we are returning, or as we're returning to the top position, we want to get full hip extension, so squeeze the glutes at the top. We don't want to finish any rep with any sort of hip flexion. We want to make sure that our hips get fully extended like that. So we'll have Ben come over here. We'll face forward. We'll have our hips or our feet about hip width apart. We're going to pretend like we're holding a resistance, and we're just going to get down into a squat and come back up. We'll do one more this way. All right, and let's turn sideways, and we'll do one more repetition. All right, back up. So we see with Ben that he has very good dorsiflexion in his ankles, allows his knees to clear and track very well over his toes, which will allow him to get to the bottom position very well. One thing that we want to pay attention to when we add an external resistance is that we want to make sure that the torso stays up throughout the entire portion of the lift. I noticed on the second rep, he kind of bent forward with the torso, so just remember to keep the torso up, chest up, looking straight forward while we add a resistance. So we're going to take this plate. It's the same position. You're going to be holding with your elbows tucked in front of you like this. And we'll have you perform 3 repetitions. Remember to keep the chest up. And back up. Good. There's 1. Good. Now let's turn that way, and we'll get another rep in. Good. And back. I'll take that from you. So with those reps, we were able to see him keep his torso up a little bit better, have a little bit better extension of the thoracic spine, and overall hip mobility is looking really good. This movement is going to challenge his quadriceps and his glutes. We're going to build strength in those areas and allow him to kind of prepare for bigger movements like barbell squats, which eventually we'll get to later on in the program. Okay, so our next exercise is going to be the weighted lunge. So any sort of lunging pattern is going to be beneficial for improving balance, unilateral strength, so we'll get to see if there's any side-to-side weaknesses. We know with our functional movement screening that he had some imbalances in his hips, so this might help us address a specific imbalance that he had that we tested for earlier on when we were screening him. And so the execution of this movement, we're going to start with our feet pretty close together, and all we're going to be doing is we're going to be stepping forward and bending down like that, and returning to the start position in a lunge pattern. One thing that we want to make sure that we pay attention to is the length of the step. We want to make sure that this knee does not cross over the toe. We want to make sure that it stays at a 90-degree angle and coming back up. And I'll demonstrate that with a side view as well. We want to make sure that we get a distance to where this is not passing a 90-degree angle. This is just for the safety of the knee joint as we perform lunges, and especially as we load it with external weights. We want to make sure that we stay as safe as possible with this exercise. A couple other things to maintain is upright posture, especially with added resistance. There's a tendency to slouch forward, so we want to make sure that we pay attention to keeping our chest up while we perform the movement. And another thing is we're going to be watching for any wobbling, any side movement like that. We're going to make sure that we keep our core engaged to limit any sort of side-to-side movement. So we'll have you perform a couple lunges on each side. We'll do 3 on each side. Back up to the center, good. Good. Make sure we stay upright. Good. Looking good so far. Let's turn that way. We'll perform 3 more. Good. All right, very good. Overall, we see that his positioning, his execution of the movement was pretty good. As we determined in our movement screening, his inline lunge test proved to be pretty good, and so we're not worried too much about any mobility issues with this exercise. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add some resistance for him to hold on to while we perform this exercise. So we'll have you grab those pain buckets by the handles. Again, make sure that we maintain upright posture while we're going through this movement, and I'll watch for everything else. Good. Make sure the knee's not going too far forward. Good. All right. Good. Stay upright. One more on the other side. All right, very good. Getting those down. Again, the lunge is going to help us build unilateral strength. So in case there's any side-to-side imbalances, this is going to be really good for addressing those, especially as we want to just improve overall basic living functions and things like that. Will be very beneficial outside of the gym as well. Okay, so our last exercise that we're going to be going over today is the unilateral leg extension. And so all this is going to be focusing on is building strength in the quadriceps. And this is an isolation movement, so we're going to want to make sure that as few things are moving as possible. We're going to make sure that this is the only joint that is moving. And all you're required to do is to move that leg out and bring it back down to the start position like that. Additionally, the hands can be placed at the side for balance, but we want to make sure that we're not pulling on them to get the weight up. And we want to make sure that there's no lean back or any other compensations like that. We only want to focus on moving at the knee joint, and we only want to focus on moving this way. Additionally, after you get to this point, the lowering phase of the exercise, we want to make sure that we're controlling that. We don't want to just let it go down. We want to make sure that we're getting the full benefit of the exercise by letting it down slow and controlled. So we will have you perform 3 reps on each side. Good control there. Let's do the other side. All right, very good. I'm going to turn the chair. We'll get a side view of this. I'll do 2 more. See, he's got very good control over that joint right there. So we're going to be adding some external resistance now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold a resistance band behind him, and we're going to loop it around his foot just to add a little bit of resistance there. So, loop this around your leg, and I'll be behind you holding it. So we want to just extend. All right, very good. Very good control. All right, we're going to go to the other foot now. And I'll have you turn the chair as well. We'll get a side view. goal of this exercise again is to build strength in the quadriceps area, as well as putting a little bit of torque on the knee joint as well, so that we get some strengthening inside that joint, more stability. And the unilateral aspect of it allows us to, again, address side-to-side balances that will probably need to be fixed just based on our screening testing and everything that we found out there.